So thanks for coming to this edition of the LEAPS program. So this is going to be our first workshop that is really skills focused. And we're going to be talking all about letters of rec and references for applications. So just really quick, like here's a first year student, second year student, third year, fourth year, cool. And then like majors, marine bio, okay. Ocean, AFS. Cool. Anything else that I missed? Any double, triple majors? Cool. Okay. Yeah, so we're talking about letters of rec today. And so hopefully everyone got one of these handouts as they walked in. They're printed on nice heavy cardstock. But this just goes over like a quick reference guide to what we're talking about today. Some of what we don't have time to get to as well. So today's outline is to just sort of go over why we're talking about these, what you need them for, talk about like who want to target to be a reference for an application and how to develop those relationships with those people. And then we'll briefly talk about how to actually go about asking for a letter. But basically, there's like a whole template on the back of this that I would recommend you take a look at. So the reason why we're talking about letters of rec is because they're kind of ubiquitous. So they're needed for just about any application as an undergrad. So whether that's like a scholarship, switch experience, if you want to go to grad school eventually, internships, fellowships, etc. I just threw up some examples of things that I've heard of people applying for here. These are all things that you need letters of rec for. So both things that are like internal to UW and external, and they really run the gamut of like, scholarships, internships, all kinds of stuff like that. So that's why they're so essential to applications. That's why they're the first thing we're talking about today. Or sorry, as part of like the LEAPS program, I'm talking about skills. So just briefly, like what do we mean when we're talking about letters of rec? These are things that basically like someone senior to you is going to be able to write for you to talk about your abilities and qualifications, and especially as they relate to the opportunity that you're actually applying for. And the whole point of a letter of rec in a lot of ways is to help add a lot of like color to your application, besides just like your transcript kind of dry, your CV maybe kind of dry. But a letter of rec can also like have a big narrative about who you are as an individual and how this opportunity fits well with your, experience, with your aspirations, with your goals, all that kind of stuff, really. So it's really helping you stand out from just like jump off the page, from talking about who you really are. And so when we talk about who's going to be able to write this for you, we're talking about people who can serve as a reference, right? So sometimes applications will ask for a letter of rec. Sometimes they'll ask for like contact information for references, right? So in this case, we're kind of talking about a reference as either someone who's actually going to write that letter or just sort of be someone they can reach out to and contact if they want to hear from someone about who you are. And so these people, it's going to depend really who you want to ask in the application. So I'd really recommend reading carefully what these things are asking for when they're asking for a reference or letter of recommendation. So generally, there's like, faculty members are going to be like safe choices. But there's going to be some fairly specific language about things like what position this person must hold or how they must know you, that you have to pay attention to make sure you're finding someone that fits that criteria. All right, so here's like some examples that are a little different. So here's an REU program. This is a research experience undergraduate program at Cal State Monterey Bay. So what they're looking for are two persons who can assess your academic abilities, academic accomplishments and motivations, work habit, potential as a researcher, and your ability to participate in and benefit from a research internship program in marine geosciences. It's a lot of stuff there, but basically they're not like telling you exactly who that needs to be. They just want to know, like, you to pick someone who can talk about these specific things. So put that there to contrast with like a Noah Holling scholarship, which is something that second year undergrads are eligible for. And they're very specific. They want a reference from someone who's taught you in a course, right? This has to be someone who can talk about your, academic abilities in the classroom. And so someone who you might pick for this REU program might not actually be an acceptable reference for this program. So the first thing to note about who to pick as a reference is to make sure you read each application carefully and see what they are looking for there, okay? Besides that, there's just also some general rules of thumb, right? So they need to be senior to you. in your academic professional circles. Those things are both important. So like senior to you should not be another undergrad, for example. And in your academic professional circles, that's something where at this point, you're really looking for people who can speak to you as it pertains to, you as a fledgling marine scientist, right? So that's basically saying like, maybe your coach that maybe you could have used for a reference in like applying for college is no longer someone you're going to want to ask for anymore. This second one about needing to be able to speak to your abilities as it relates to the opportunity is also really important, kind of like the first one. But here, what's really important is that like this person needs to be able to talk about things that are going to be relevant to what you'd be doing in that, internship, research experience, whatever that you're applying for. And so someone like Joe, hi Joe, your academic advisor is often not going to be a good reference because they don't know you in the right context, right? There's someone who can talk about, like, oh, Marcus is a nice person. Like I like my conversations with Marcus when he comes to my office and we talk about classes. But that does not translate well into being able to talk about you as like how you would be in a research experience, right?
Yeah, we like to say, we haven't been in a situation of grading work, supervise you in a job, that kind of thing. If you were applying to be a student ambassador at the college or work as a student assistant in the dean's office, like maybe if you participated in a like leadership development or club leadership or something, that's really different. When we're talking about your academic record, we're not able to say, well, here are the details of how you got this grade.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Really good things to remember. You want to ask people you put your best foot forward with. What I mean by that is like if you had a professor and you like didn't go to class consistently or you didn't do well in their class, anything like that is not something you're going to want to ask, even though maybe they would technically be like a acceptable reference for an application. That person's not going to be able to write a good thing about a letter about you and your sort of character and how you fit with the opportunity. People you interact with more recently, this is often like a good tiebreaker. It's not necessarily like the most important thing. But like if you had two people that can speak about you and maybe one's a faculty member you just had a class with, over the past year and one person's from like high school, I'll go with the person from college because they want references who can speak about you in the current moment. And so the farther back you go, sort of the less weight that can carry. And the final one here is something we're going to expand on a bit, but like as we talked about with that, like what a reference should do for you, it's like they really want to be able to talk about you, the individual, right? So like if all they can say about you is like, oh, they were a student in my class, that's not very compelling. It's not going to make you stand out in the way that someone can talk about you, tell a narrative about you and your journey, who you are as a person is really going to help more. Okay, any questions about what we've covered so far? Yeah. It will be posted, yes. So we have a web page and we're going to post slides and recordings up here when we're done. Yep. I also just want to point out that there's a handout there that covers a lot of information as well. That's another quick reference guide to everything we're talking about. Any other questions? Okay. So now I want to jump to a slightly different topic, which is like we've talked about who would be a good reference, right? But you can also play an active role in like cultivating someone and cultivating a relationship with someone who can then serve as a reference for you and basically finding ways to interact with them that are going to make that letter of recommendation much stronger, right? So I have a bunch of quotes from faculty members here who are writing lots and lots of letters of recommendation for undergrads. And so as part of developing this workshop last year, we sent an FAQ to a bunch of faculty members in the School of Aquatic Fishery Sciences and Oceanography, Marine Biology. And so I'm just going to highlight a bunch of quotes from them that I thought were really relevant, right? So who's here has had a class with Luke before? Just curious. So Luke teaches like the 311 class, like the ichthyology, which I think most students will run into eventually. Yeah, Joe's saying yes. Okay. Well, Luke here is saying every student can benefit from having a faculty member as a reference at some point. You all need writers eventually, so start planning ahead and developing those relationships with faculty early. Even if you don't need a letter immediately, you'll most likely need one later, so think ahead. Right, so even if like, you're just starting out and there's not something that you have in mind right now for what you want to apply to, as we talked about at the beginning, chances are you're going to need a reference for those things. And so starting as soon as possible is going to help you be in the position where when you do encounter an application that requires this, you're going to have someone like, oh yeah, I should go ask Luke because we had a class with him, I did well, we talked, stuff like that. This is kind of what I mentioned with that fifth bullet about like needing references who can speak about you. I don't really want to read these quotes. I'm just going to take a sip of water. I'll let you read them. So what Mikkel and Julia are really talking about here is like, if the only thing that they know you from is the grade that they gave you at the end of a class, that is not going to translate into a good letter at all, right? Because that is not going to be something they can talk about. And like, how are you going to write a letter about someone when all you have is like what their grade was and their name, right? So cultivating a reference really goes beyond just doing well in a class. So here is some advice from Mikkel on what makes them actually excited to write a letter. So Mikkel's saying that she's most excited to write letters for students who have made an effort to engage with course content and myself inside and or outside of the classroom. I enjoy writing letters for students I've gotten to know over the quarter or over the years. I've seen their successes, failures, and growth, right? So like cultivating a reference really means going beyond doing well in the class and like, how are you going to get someone to actually know you? And how are you going to do that by making sure that you're consistently sort of standing out a bit more in and outside of a class that you have with a faculty member? And here's a quote from Chelsea. Chelsea apparently taught right before this because there's a name tag from her when I came in here. And I'll actually read this quote as well. So what Chelsea's communicating here with her kind of like SAT word choices is like when you're like trying to stand out from other people, it's really just important to like sort of have this in your mind and make sure that you're actually always conveying qualities that they're going to be able to write about when they want to write you a letter of recommendation in the future. Okay, so this all seems like very daunting, right? So it's like, how are you going to, these people are so busy, faculty members have, a lot of jobs besides just teaching, they're doing research, they're mentoring students. And so Luke here is just encouraging you, that like, even though this seems scary, and it is scary, and it's anxiety, invoking, just like, it's really worth it to go out of your way, to introduce yourself, make yourself known, and to find ways to reach out to people and stand out a bit. And so like, if maybe going up to them in class seems kind of scary, like you can always email them as well. And that's an okay way to start, right? Okay, so this is just sort of the bullets from the handout that you have, but this is sort of summarizing a lot of the stuff that we've talked about with like faculty quotes. So making sure to get to know your instructor so they can get to know you, right? So it's always important if you actually have somebody to talk to a faculty member about, that's always very helpful. And by getting to know them, their research, that can be really helpful. To introduce yourself so that they actually, in a big classroom of 100 plus students, they can actually remember your name. Attending office hours or finding time to meet with them, participating actively, finding ways to interact with them outside of sort of the dedicated 15 minutes or an hour 20 you have for class. And just making sure to always put that best foot forward. So right now, that's sort of a lot of stuff that we just talked about. But I want you to just take a few minutes and think about like, okay, if I was going to ask for a letter of rec for something that maybe I wanted to apply for in the spring, like who would be top of my list for that? Right. And then as you think about that, like, what are the barriers that you feel in your mind when you're like, oh, I want to ask blank for a letter of rec, but I feel that this is a thing I'm having a hard time getting over, or these sort of feelings arise when I think about that. But take a few minutes to just sort of jot down some thoughts, so we can start working through this. You may make another 30 seconds or so. Okay, so for this next part, I want us to, where am I? To actually share out about this. So I'm going to activate this poll everywhere. Oh, it's already activated. And you can either go to this URL or this QR code. And I want sort of folks to throw out some of the things that came up for them. And you should be able to upvote other people that resonate with you. So let me know if you have any connectivity issues, but hopefully it should be working. So we have 13 or so. Cool. Keep on like upvoting the ones that resonate with you and make sure to look through the other ones. But yeah, I totally agree with a lot of what I'm seeing up here. I'm very curious about this first one. This didn't come up last year. Um, so what I'm hearing is that for classes that you're in, there's both like office hours offered by TAs and by the professor, but like folks feel a lot more comfortable going to TA than the professor. I'm hearing. Okay. Yeah. So one thing I want to quickly bring up to talk about this one, um, what is very common because often, with your courses, you're interacting with TAs more closely because, you have that opportunity or you have like a lab section with them. It is very common, especially for first and second year students, to get letters of recommendation that are co-signed by a TA and a faculty member, right? Because this is like opportunities that you'd be applying for know that this is a big thing. Like ultimately, the faculty member is like the one who like is gonna sign it, but like they have a close relationship with their TAs. They trust like what they would tell them, and often like a TA can be very involved in writing a letter that eventually gets, you know, signature for maybe them and the faculty member as well. So just want to put that out there that TAs can often be part of the letter writing team, and so not to discount your relationships with just TAs. Okay. What else do we write? Asking about a rec feels like a personal favor, and asking for that when I only know them in an academic setting can feel a bit awkward. Yeah, I totally hear that. It's kind of weird because it's like you're asking someone to like spend extra time from their day to just do something to just help you, right? I think I totally feel that. I do want to throw out there though that like I've been talking to a lot of faculty members recently, and they are writing a lot of letters. Like they view this as part of their job as well, right? And so, yes, it feels like you're asking them to do something just for you, but like this is part of their job too, as like a teacher and mentor, is to help the students that they have interacted with actually make that next step, get into the field, opportunities. Yeah, right. That being said, it is also true that they are like taking extra time out of their day to help you. And so as we'll talk about a little bit more later, like making sure that you're very aware and cognizant of that fact and respectful of their time, giving them plenty of time to write letters, being very like thankful and polite. That goes a long way as well, because even though it is their job, it is like adding another thing to your plate. Okay. Whether or not that teacher professor works in the field I want to go to, it was weird to ask an English professor I know for that of rec in like a STEM field. Yeah, totally. This is where I would say that looking at sort of that part of the application where it's talking about who they want is really important, because in some cases this could be okay, right? But it's really going to be context specific. Okay, lots about office hours. Schedule about, yeah, I reject my request. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So let me now, I want to have us try and crowdsource some of the like potential ways we could address some of these. Okay. So what I'm hearing themes is a lot of it is about like not feeling super comfortable with like level that you know someone, and like not sure how to actually develop that connection further. So the third part I want us to talk about, okay, it's in a window. Yeah, that works. Okay. So hopefully you can all still see. Wow, I have too many tabs open. The things people have thrown up there on like your phones as well. But if there's anything that like you see up here, and you can think of like some ways you could maybe address this, I'm just curious to hear what you think might be potential solutions to addressing the things that came up. Crowdsource. Yeah.
But just like remembering that there's nothing to lose in a way, because either you're never gonna see this professor again, or they're gonna want to get a letter of rec. Like,
First they can say it's no, right? Like it's possible, but like you're saying, sort of like that's sort of the worst that can happen to you, right? Yeah, totally. Yeah, go ahead.
I think go to office hours if you have questions to ask. Also just have some slight better with them on like this happening for their days or stuff like that, and try to do a person connection that's not just
Right.
work and just answering questions.
Yeah. So I think that I am personally someone who I feel really uncomfortable making small talk with people. So I'm curious, like, I think it's a great suggestion, but I think it's also helpful to have some things in your back pocket that you could like sort of talk about. So like when we think about trying to build personal connections, and sort of like not just talk about the class that you're in, what are things that people can think of that would be like interesting things to talk about besides that? Yeah, go ahead. Vacation. Okay. So maybe especially after like a break or something, like, oh, I'm doing a break, right? Should use these for my first dates too. Kidding, okay, so let's see, prompts. This is a terrible race. Prompts, okay, ask about break or vacation, yep. Okay, what else? Yeah, go ahead.
I feel like talking to them about their research is like a really good way to get into it. Like I talked to the professors about that. It's like they're always interested to talk about it.
Right,
So,
right.
Like you're making effort.
Yeah, so that's like part of the research, right? So like that idea of getting to know your professors so you can get to know them, like this is a big part of it, right? Like every faculty member has like information about them online. They have like a web page through UW. So doing some background reading of them, it's going to help you have some things in your back pocket where it's like, oh, I saw you do research on, I don't know, fish phylogenies or whatever. Like, that's cool. I was curious about this part of it. But yeah, it's a great one. What else?
I don't really agree with us, but volunteer weekend project is like, you know,
The big right. They like that. And yeah, totally.
maybe have a team to secure like your undergrad or something.
Right. I'll just say like career journey. Maybe like inspiration or journey as students. Yeah. The other, yeah.
At the beginning, of course, so like, you don't really, like,
Right. Common interests. I'd say like academic or non-academic. Yeah. Yeah, right. Cool. That's a great list. Yeah, I remember when I was a first year student, like I knew I wanted to apply for something and I knew I needed a letter of rec. And so I sort of did a little brainstorming session on my own before like going to office hour or like just sort of like, I don't want to say lurking, but like after class, just like waiting around and like asking them about questions, like a few things. I think just having some things in mind before you go in that situation is going to be super helpful for easing the nerves a bit, and just finding you have something to fall back on. And really like a lot of these things that we're talking about or like finding those informal ways to chat, like really these conversations are probably gonna last like, I don't know, 5 minutes, right? So just having like a few things to chat about or even less than 5 minutes is gonna make that a lot easier. Okay, let me step back. Are there any other thoughts we have about how to overcome some of these things that have been brought up? Yeah. Yeah.
general. I'm not sure if I should like write down list of things they want to talk about in the whatever recommendation or just like, you know, let them, you know. Rather something
Yeah, talk about this a bit more later. But yeah, I think generally speaking, people will really appreciate having talking points or having you help guide their letter. Because as I said, like the faculty members are teaching really big classes, they've met a lot of students. And so while it may be like obvious to you, like, oh yeah, I did really well in this class, and there's this project we talked about in office hours, and we had this conversation about this, and like I was talking about my passion for this thing, like they probably don't remember all of that as well as you do. They probably just remember like, oh yeah, like Mark was that person, like he's really engaged. That's probably decent of what they remember. And so having talking points and helping them write that letter, I definitely would recommend that. And even though it feels kind of awkward sometimes when it's like, talk about this thing, how I'm so awesome, right? Like having those things is going to provide that structure and those talking points that are going to make their letter way better. Yeah. Yeah, Joe.
Just throw in two things. One, just as a frame of reference for maybe kind of dealing with anxiety reaching out, is remember that faculty can do their it's an experience that they had to go through, and they're familiar and they know it's kind of popular. And the second thing that I'd throw out there, Marcus, you might have a better perspective on this, but I think it's fine to ask faculty ahead of checking in with them, even if it's through something structured like office hours. About like, is this a good time for me to talk about bigger picture things? You know, this might be more obvious from the pace of the class that they're teaching, a big test, or they're doing a bunch of grading of papers or something like that. But faculty also get split across a bunch of different roles in their positions, and so it can be harder to tell just how jammed up they are at that time. And I think that's a pretty quick one, just to be like, hey, I'm really enjoying the class. I was hoping to, ask you some bigger picture questions. With office hours this week, okay, fine.
Yeah.
Kind of let them know. I'm sure that sometimes with office hours, there's some more like driven, like, yeah, we really need to, answer questions regarding the class specifically.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, Joe. Because yeah, sometimes an office hour, which is good, 13 people wanting to ask questions about the upcoming midterm, maybe not a good time, right? And so, yeah, emailing ahead, because like this idea of like feeling maybe you're wasting their time or feels intimidating, things like that. If you've gotten permission beforehand that, oh, this is a good time, well, then like they've already given you that permission that they're like happy to talk to you. And that can sort of help you get over that initial hump. Sometimes too, they might be like, oh, actually, that's a bad time. But how about this time, right? Like, I'll be in my office, tomorrow afternoon. Like, just drop on by, and I'd be happy to chat then, right? Because I've heard from a lot of faculty members that talking with students, people who are like really excited about the field, is like some of the best parts of their job. But their job is very busy, and so like if they can find times, they want to find time to do that. But yeah, like finding a good time to do that is definitely advisable. Yeah. I would say that like if you have an office hour that's like very sparsely attended, and maybe you've gone there before, no one's really there, then like maybe you don't have to ask always ahead of time. But like this is, I would say, never like a bad idea so that they have that context, that expectation going into it, and you have that permission where it's like, oh yeah, they want to talk to me right now. So any other thoughts? I would also say that especially as like a earlier time at UW, if you have flexibility in your schedule to choose classes that are more major specific or that are smaller enrollment, those are going to be places that are going to be much easier for these things to be built, right? If like your whole schedule is full of like 250-person physics lectures, like it's gonna be kind of tough, right? And so thinking about things besides just like making progress in your degree and being strategic about what you choose can be really helpful in finding those people, especially early on, that are going to be good letter writers. But I was on undergrad here, so I'm not sure always how easy that is to actually do in practice. Yeah.
Professor, and you like felt like you kind of had a personal connection, but now it's like the next quarter or a couple quarters later, and you have like a question about their research or about their career pathway or something, is it like appropriate to still go to their office hours and schedule time to talk even though you're not?
Yeah, so I think that the second option of like emailing them is going to be, I would say like always okay, right? Because you just like office hours are meant to be for people that are in that class of that quarter. And so they might feel okay with it. They might also not appreciate like what's showing up in that time. But if they email and you're like, hey, like I took this class with you, I really liked it, and I want to have a time to chat about some of these things, right? I think that's totally fine. Yeah. Yeah.
One that like focus on any professor, right? It's most important. So that's really what I like. So like, even if you haven't met them, it's like failing to
Yeah, people are very used to people reaching out to them all the time. So yeah, I totally would agree that like that's totally a fun thing to do. You also might encounter some people who are like really busy or like don't have time to respond to you as well. And so just to be aware that that can also happen, but not to like take it personally. Okay, let me move on here. Thanks for taking part in this. I'm gonna go back to our slides. Let's hide this. Okay. Okay, so I want to talk about actually asking for a letter of rec, and this is like the main focus of the back side of this handout. And so, just sort of for motivation for this part, we talked about this a little bit already, but even though this is part of a faculty member's job, like these things take a lot of time. I was just talking with Carrie Maish, director of Marine Bio yesterday, and she is like currently underwater trying to write letters for people, right? And so making sure that you are cognizant of that fact when you're communicating with them, when you're asking them, is really, really key, right? So a couple quotes, Luke saying like it takes like many hours to write a good letter. And Suji, right? Your question about like providing information, the less info they have, the harder it is for them. So giving them more stuff to write about, more content, they're actually gonna appreciate that a lot. It's like, oh, okay, I don't have to like sit there and be like, what am I gonna write here, right? Having stuff that they're like, oh, I can plug that right in. That's great. And then Jose has this quote here where like basically he says like if he doesn't really know you, he can make it really quick. He just has a template which says like, dear so and so, insert student name here, got blank grade in this class, and like, cool, right? Like that's probably not going to help any application because it's not going to help you stand out besides what's already on your transcript, right? So if you don't provide information, it's going to be generic, it's going to be bad, it's not very helpful. But if the more he knows them and the more that he knows the opportunity matters, he's going to put more time into it. It's going to take a long time, right? So anytime that there's people writing letters and they're writing good letters, they are very involved in that process. Okay, so for how to ask, it's sort of all in the handout here. It lays out a general structure that I'd recommend for that request email for the letter. So I kind of like goes over this, but it's like an intro to yourself, an intro to the opportunity, and then logistical information. Those are sort of the big three components that are going to be the things that people need to actually write a letter about you, right? And there's also an important bullet here too. Folks are asking like, oh, I'm afraid that they want to reject my request. Sometimes that might be a good thing ultimately. And the reason I say that is because of things like Jose's quote, right? So like if you're like asking for a letter of rec and they don't think they can write you a letter of rec, it's probably better for you if they just say no, because that way they won't have something that's actually going to hurt your application rather than help it. And so there's a note here too about like, it's always helpful and also respectful of their time to include language where it's like, if you think that I would be a good candidate for this opportunity, I really appreciate a letter of recommendation. Or like, if you think you could write a strong letter of recommendation, I would appreciate this. Basically language that says like, you don't have to do this. I understand this takes a lot of time. And I also understand that like, you might not be able to. So who that information is really key. Are there any questions about that sort of section up here about how to ask for a letter? I just really want to read the bullet points out to you again. Oh, yeah, sorry, go ahead. Yeah, generally speaking, yes. In person can be okay, but like it can also be awkward, right? Both for you and for them. If like I would say that like unless you know them really well and you're really confident, an email is always safer. Just because like there's a little you're slightly removed from it, so they can like think about it and decide. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like, say like after undergrad, I do something else for a couple of years, and then I'm applying for an opportunity. Like, how long until your professors like it's too late to ask them, or like, can you ever like can you still do that if it's been a couple of years?
Yeah, I would say it depends on the level of interaction you have with them. Like if you had a class with Jose and then you didn't talk to Jose for 4 years and you want to ask him, probably no longer a good reference. It's been a long time and they probably didn't really have the content to talk about you in the first place. But if you did have a strong relationship with them, that can be someone that's totally fine to go back to. And I'd also recommend that there's a little blurb here in the bottom, but remember to keep in touch, where like even after you no longer taking class with them, like trying to find ways to interact with them, send them an email, find time to chat, things like that. Whether you're still at UW or have left, that can be really helpful for sort of keeping the spark alive a bit, where you still like feel comfortable going back to them. They're still gonna remember who you are. I want to add one more thing about the email question too. Um, Another reason why an email is probably better is because there'll be a written record, especially about the logistics, right? And so they having a very clear layout, like here's when it's due, here's the link, here's how you submit it. Having all of that written down is way better than like telling them that they probably forget about it, maybe it doesn't have on the calendar and things like that. So it's another reason to do that. Okay. Yeah. Any other questions about this part or like the other part about what to provide a reference to help them write a letter? Let me just expand real quickly on like this talking points or self-assessment statement, right? So that's the idea of providing them something that they can work off of. And I know that can feel really awkward, but like everyone I've talked to is like, please send me that because like it's gonna make my life so much easier and make your letter way better. But these can really vary in terms of like how much they want you to provide. Some people will like, oh, send me your resume. Some people like want talking points of like how they know you. I had one person once have me write my own letter of recommendation. That was weird, but it will happen sometimes too. Like you'll write it, they'll read it, and they'll be like, that sounds about fair, and they'll just sign it, right? So things like that can happen. Um, but often this sort of like level of providing just like here's what I think would be good to include, and here's reminders what like how you know me and like what I did in your class or in your lab or whatever. That's super always helpful. Okay. I also want to highlight this about submission logistics. So this came up in the conversation with Terry the other day. Letters of rec can sometimes not be letters of rec. And what I mean by that is that like traditionally it's a letter signed by the faculty member, but sometimes more and more applications are going towards like, here's a form. And in this box, I want you to write about how you know the student. In this box, I want you to write about their abilities that pertains to this. So make sure that you've gone through that and you know all these things. Because if you ask for a letter of recommendation, you don't tell them that, they write you a letter, they go to submit it, and it's a bunch of check boxes and like forms to fill out, they're not going to be very happy. So make sure to do that. And if there's ever multiple opportunities you're applying for, finding a way to collate that information and like have like a table, for example, of like, here's these internships I want to apply for, here's a deadline, here's how you submit it. That's going to help to keep track of things. And yeah, it's going to be very helpful to them. Yeah. Right. It's just like here's a link if you're the reference kind of thing. Yeah. So I would dig around for that information. And if you can't, there's often a point of contact for an internship or for a scholarship that their job is to answer emails about those things. So it's like, hey, I was going to ask this person about a recommendation. I just want to double check that. What the format is for that. So yeah. Okay, so just the last thing I want to note is sort of a reminder about this bottom part. Here's another quote from Jose where he's being very candid as usual. But he basically says that like how you interact after asking a recommendation or after leaving my class is a huge difference. And it's like it can just be annoying if you're like, Jose, I need another letter. Jose, I need another letter. I need another letter, right? That's really annoying unless you're like keeping them in contact. And like a really important thing is that like if you ask for a recommendation and they provide it for you, you should make sure to thank them and then also let them know what happened to the application, right? Because if they're like, oh, I wrote Marcus a letter and then I never know what happened with that, like I don't want to do that anymore because like what's the point if I like I don't even know if it helped them, right? And so keeping updated on the application journey and also just your own journey after that is super helpful, especially if you're going to be asking them for letters of recommendation in the future. All right, any other questions about anything we've talked about? All right. Cool, coming around 50 minutes, so that's perfect. So yeah, thanks for coming today. Again, this is sort of the first time we are doing this as part of the program. This is a link to a Google form that just asks you about the workshop and any suggestions for improvements. Very much appreciated. But yeah, I'll be around if you have any other questions.
Hey, everybody, the priority is to keep